Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Andrew Thompson, and I've spent 15 years explaining away every ghost story, UFO sighting, and supernatural bullshit in these woods. But the ancient redwoods were about to teach me that some things can't be rationalized away. The call came at 10:34 p.m. on November 15, 2012. I was nursing my third beer and watching the Giants highlights when my phone buzzed with an unknown San Francisco number. Marcus Rodriguez's voice cracked through the speaker like breaking glass. "Please, my sister Jennifer. She's been missing for 36 hours in your park. The other rangers gave up. They said the storm makes searching impossible, but you're my last hope. I'll pay you anything, just please don't abandon her." I'd heard this desperation before, families clinging to hope when logic screamed otherwise. "Sir, I understand your concern, but if our search teams couldn't..." "She's alive." His voice turned fierce. "I can feel it. We're twins. I know she's still breathing. Please." Something in his tone made me set down the beer. "Tell me exactly what happened." "Jennifer's a professional photographer. She went into the Grove of Titans section yesterday morning for a National Geographic shoot. Her last Instagram post was at 3:22 p.m. Just a photo of some massive redwood trunk with weird shadows. She had a satellite phone, GPS beacon, everything. Then, nothing." I grabbed my notepad, already mentally cataloging the logical explanations. Dead battery, equipment failure, injury causing unconsciousness. Weather conditions? Rain started heavy around 4 p.m. Temperature dropped to 38 degrees, but Andrew, he paused. The other photographers in her group, they said something was wrong with the trees that day. Kept talking about branches moving when there was no wind, shadows falling the wrong direction. "Mr. Rodriguez, photographers often see..." "My sister has been shooting in forests for 8 years. She knows the difference between wind patterns and..." He trailed off. "And what?" "And trees that don't want to be photographed." I almost hung up. Almost. But something nagged at me. Probably the memory of my own daughter's face when I'd missed her birthday last month due to a false alarm rescue. "I'll be there at first light. No promises except that I'll look. Thank you, God. Thank you. Just bring her home." The line went dead. I stared at my iPhone 4S, the blue glow reflecting off my wedding ring that I still couldn't bring myself to remove 2 years after the divorce papers. Outside, November rain pelted my cabin windows like angry fingers. I checked the weather app. 34 degrees, 90% humidity, winds gusting to 40 mph. Perfect conditions for hypothermia. If Jennifer was injured and exposed, 36 hours might already be too long. But I'd learned to trust data over emotion. Search patterns, probability matrices, statistical likelihood of survival based on age, fitness level, and equipment. The math usually told the whole story. By 5:47 a.m., I was gearing up in the ranger station. My Garmin GPS unit showed full satellite lock. My Motorola radio crackled with morning check-ins from other stations, and my K-bar knife hung reassuringly from my duty belt. I'd packed my standard SAR loadout: first aid kit, emergency bivvy, water purification tablets, high-energy bars, emergency flare gun, and enough gear to survive 72 hours if needed. The Grove of Titans sat 8 miles northeast of the visitor center, accessible only by the Tall Trees Trail. These redwoods were the largest living things on Earth, some over 350 feet tall and 2,000 years old. Tourists loved them. I respected them the way I respected any massive natural force, with caution and scientific understanding. The morning air tasted of wet cedar and decomposing leaves as I started up the muddy trail. My Danner boots found solid purchase on the wooden walkway sections, but the dirt portions had turned to ankle-deep slurry. Perfect conditions for tracking, and perfect conditions for erasing tracks. At mile marker 3.2, I found the first sign. Jennifer's footprints in the mud were clear and deep, size 7 hiking boots with a distinctive lug pattern. The stride length indicated she'd been moving at normal pace, not running or struggling. But something else caught my attention. The prints were surrounded by odd depressions in the earth, almost like massive root systems had shifted underground. I knelt and examined the soil more closely. The depressions were recent. The rain hadn't filled them yet. But roots don't move, especially not redwood roots. They anchor these giants against Pacific storms that would topple lesser trees. Probable explanation: ground saturation causing soil subsidence, I muttered into my digital recorder. Note: ground instability may indicate sinkhole risk in area. Jennifer's trail continued north, veering off the main boardwalk onto one of the unmarked photographer's paths. These routes weren't officially maintained, just deer trails and social paths carved by decades of artists seeking the perfect shot. The deeper I went, the more the forest closed in around me. Redwoods create their own microclimate, blocking out 90% of sunlight and muffling sound until even your own footsteps seem distant and hollow. The fog clung to everything like cobwebs, reducing visibility to maybe 30 feet in any direction. At 7:23 a.m., I found her camera. The Canon 5D Mark III lay in a patch of ferns, its expensive L-series lens partially buried in wet leaves. No photographer abandons a $3,000 camera unless something is seriously wrong. I photographed the scene with my own camera before touching anything, then carefully examined the equipment. The camera was undamaged, but the memory card was missing. The battery indicator showed 60% charge, plenty of juice remaining. No signs of impact or struggle around the site. It was as if Jennifer had simply set it down and walked away. But photographers don't do that, ever. I expanded my search pattern in concentric circles, looking for signs of struggle, blood, torn clothing, anything that might indicate what happened. Instead, I found something that made my skin crawl despite my rational mind. Massive grooves in the earth, like something huge had been dragged through the forest floor. But the grooves weren't straight lines. They curved and twisted like tentacles. And they were fresh, carved through the mud sometime in the last day. Probable explanation, I said into my recorder, though my voice sounded less confident. Fallen tree limbs dragged by wind currents during storm. But even as I said it, I knew it was bullshit. These grooves were too uniform, too purposeful, and they led deeper into the grove, toward the heart of the ancient forest, where the oldest and largest redwoods grew. I followed them. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in the span of 50 yards. My breath misted in the air and my fingers began to stiffen inside my tactical gloves. This made no sense. November in Northern California was mild, not Arctic. But thermodynamics bowed to local geography here. The massive trees created wind tunnels and thermal gradients that could shift dramatically over short distances. That's what I told myself anyway. At 8:15 a.m., my radio crackled. Base to Unit 7, what's your 20? I keyed the mic. Mile marker 6, Grove of Titans sector, following victim's trail. Visibility poor, but making progress. Copy that. Weather Service reports incoming storm system, heavy rain and possible snow above 2,000 feet. Recommend return to base by 1400 hours. Understood. But I wasn't leaving without Jennifer. Something in her brother's voice had gotten under my skin. That absolute certainty that she was still alive. Twins claimed to have special connections, but I'd learned to trust desperate families about as much as I trusted psychics and ghost hunters. Still, I kept walking. The grooves in the earth grew deeper and more pronounced. Whatever had made them was either much larger than I'd initially thought, or there were multiple sources. The pattern reminded me of something, but I couldn't place what. It nagged at the back of my mind like a song lyric I couldn't quite remember. Then I noticed the trees themselves. Redwoods are ancient, alien things. Their bark is thick and fibrous, deeply grooved with natural patterns that can look almost like faces in the right light. But these trees, something was off about their bark patterns. The grooves seemed more pronounced, more deliberate, almost like, Jesus Christ, I whispered, like claw marks. Massive claw marks raked down the trunks of trees that had stood for centuries. Fresh sap bled from the wounds, dark and viscous in the morning light. The scratches went up at least 20 feet, higher than any bear could reach, wider than any known predator could make. My rational mind kicked into overdrive. "Storm damage," I said aloud. "Lightning strikes can cause bark splitting that resembles claw marks. Sap bleeding is normal response to trunk damage. But lightning strikes didn't explain the systematic nature of the marks or why they appeared on dozens of trees in a clear pattern leading deeper into the grove. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Andrew's situation? Comment below. I checked my GPS, 8.3 miles from the parking area, elevation 1,147 feet. The device showed my location clearly, but something was wrong with the satellite signal. It kept fluctuating between full bars and no signal, like something was interfering with the GPS constellation overhead. Electronic equipment malfunction was common in dense forest. The canopy could block signals, and moisture could cause interference. That's all it was. That's all it was. At 9:42 a.m., I heard her voice. "Help me." Faint and distant, carried on the wind from somewhere ahead. "Please, somebody help me." My heart slammed against my ribs. I keyed my radio immediately. "Base, this is Unit 7. I have audio contact with the missing person. Proceeding to location for extraction." But my radio produced only static. I tried again. Nothing but white noise and electronic squealing. The GPS had gone completely dead, its screen showing only an error message. Satellite signal lost. "Jennifer," I shouted into the fog. "Jennifer Rodriguez, this is Park Ranger Andrew Thompson. Call out again so I can find you." "Here, I'm here. Hurry, please hurry." Her voice came from the north, maybe 100 yards ahead. I crashed through the underbrush, my rational mind cataloging everything wrong with the situation. The voice was too clear for the distance and weather conditions. Sound didn't carry that well in dense fog. And why hadn't she called out before I yelled? But desperation overrode analysis. Someone was alive out there and needed help. I followed the voice deeper into the grove where the redwoods grew so massive that 3 people holding hands couldn't encircle their trunks. These giants had stood when Jesus walked the earth, had weathered ice ages and volcanic eruptions and the rise and fall of civilizations. And now they watched me with something that felt uncomfortably like intelligence. "Ranger Thompson, over here." The voice was closer now, maybe 50 feet ahead. I could see a flash of red fabric through the trees, Jennifer's jacket, according to her brother's description. I pushed through a curtain of hanging moss and stepped into a small clearing where the canopy opened enough to let in pale gray light. Jennifer Rodriguez sat with her back against the largest redwood I'd ever seen, her knees drawn up to her chest. She looked exactly like her brother's description. Hispanic, late 20s, athletic build, wearing a red North Face jacket and dark hiking pants. Her long black hair was matted with moisture and debris, but she appeared uninjured. "Thank God," I breathed, approaching carefully. "Ma'am, I'm Ranger Thompson. Your brother sent me to find you. Are you hurt?" She looked up at me with eyes that reflected the forest light like polished glass. "I've been waiting for you, Andrew." Something cold crawled up my spine. I hadn't told her my first name. "How long have you been here?" I asked, unshouldering my pack and pulling out my first aid kit. "We need to get you warm and dry. You've been missing for almost 2 days." "2 days?" She laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. "It feels like forever. But time moves strangely here, doesn't it, Andrew? Sometimes a moment lasts hours. Sometimes hours pass in a blink." I knelt beside her and began my medical assessment. Normal color, no obvious injuries, pupils responsive to light. But her skin was room temperature despite 2 nights of exposure to freezing conditions. No hypothermia symptoms, no frostbite, no dehydration. Impossible. "Jennifer, I need you to tell me exactly what happened. How did you get separated from your group?" I was photographing the grandmother tree. She gestured to the massive redwood behind her. "This one." She's over 2,500 years old. Did you know that? She was here when Rome fell. She watched the Spanish explorers arrive. She remembers when your people first came with their saws and their roads. My people. An odd way to phrase it. You were taking pictures, and then what happened? She didn't like it. Jennifer's voice took on a dreamy quality. The old grandmother didn't like being captured in little boxes. She told me cameras steal souls, take pieces of living things and trap them in dead images. So she took my camera away. Jennifer, cameras don't. And then she showed me the truth about this place, about what really lives in the deep woods, about the hunger that grows in roots and branches and bark, about the slow thoughts that move through heartwood and sap. I stood up, my hand moving instinctively to my radio. Still nothing but static. The fog had thickened around us until I could barely see 10 feet in any direction. The forest pressed in like living walls. We need to leave, I said firmly. Right now. Can you walk? Andrew? Her voice was patient, almost maternal. Look around you. Really look. Against my better judgment, I did. The trees were moving, not swaying in wind. There was no wind. Moving deliberately, with purpose and intention. Massive trunks twisted slowly like sleeping giants rolling over. Branches reached toward each other across the clearing, their tips touching and intertwining like fingers. Roots burst from the earth in writhing coils, creating a loose circle around us. Hallucination, I whispered. Carbon monoxide from decomposing vegetation, altitude sickness, hypothermia affecting brain function. But even as I rattled off medical explanations, I knew this was something else entirely. Something my rational mind couldn't process or categorize or explain away. The woman who looked like Jennifer smiled with too many teeth. She wants to keep you, Andrew. The grandmother tree has been lonely for so long. Decades pass like heartbeats to her. She needs company that will last. I backed away, my hand finding the grip of my Kabar knife. You're not Jennifer Rodriguez. I am now. I wear her memories, her voice, her face. But inside, I'm part of something much older, much hungrier. The roots erupted from the ground around my feet, thick as anacondas and moving with serpentine grace. I slashed with my knife, the blade biting deep into woody flesh that bled dark sap. The root recoiled with a sound like screaming wind. You can't fight the forest, Andrew. You're just one small man with metal tools. We are legion, we are ancient, we are the lungs of the world. More roots burst upward, grasping for my ankles. I rolled sideways, came up running, crashed through the wall of fog toward where I thought the trail should be. Behind me, the thing wearing Jennifer's face laughed like breaking branches. The forest had come alive with malevolent purpose. Tree limbs swept down like massive arms trying to clothesline me as I ran. Roots erupted in my path, forming snares and tripwires. The ground itself seemed to shift and buckle, creating sinkholes that opened just as my feet touched down. My rational mind gibbered and screamed, trying to process the impossible. Trees didn't move. Forests didn't hunt. This was mass hallucination, some kind of psychological break brought on by stress and isolation, and a branch thick as my torso slammed into my back, sending me sprawling face first into the mud. I rolled, slashed upward with my knife, felt it sink into something that shrieked and bled, got my feet under me, kept running through a forest that had become a living nightmare. I had no idea which direction led back to the trail. The fog blocked out all landmarks, and my compass spun wildly like the needle couldn't find magnetic north. But I could hear sounds behind me, massive shapes crashing through the underbrush, the groan and crack of moving timber, and underneath it all, a low rumbling that I felt in my bones more than heard with my ears. The forest was growling. I burst through a wall of hanging moss and stumbled into another clearing. This one was different, older, more primal. The redwoods here were giants among giants, their trunks disappearing into the fog overhead like pillars holding up the sky. And in the center of the clearing stood the real Jennifer Rodriguez. She was imprisoned in a cage made of living wood. Branches and roots had grown together in an intricate lattice, creating a cell just large enough for her to stand upright. Her face was pale with terror, but her eyes blazed with determination and fury. "Andrew!" she shouted when she saw me. "It's a trap. The trees, they're alive, they're—" A root erupted from the ground beside me, thick as a telephone pole and moving like a striking snake. I dove sideways, rolled, came up with my knife ready. But there were too many of them. Dozens of woody tentacles bursting from the earth in coordinated attacks. One wrapped around my left ankle and yanked me off my feet. I hit the ground hard, tasted blood, slashed frantically at the root until it released me. Another one grabbed my wrist, trying to disarm me. I twisted, pulled, felt something in my shoulder pop as I broke free. "The grandmother tree!" Jennifer screamed from her wooden prison. "It's controlling everything. You have to—" A branch swept down and clamped over her mouth like a wooden gag. Her eyes went wide with panic as more branches wound around her throat, cutting off her air. I looked up, following the maze of attacking roots and branches to their source. The largest redwood in the clearing, easily 400 feet tall and 40 feet in diameter, pulsed with malevolent life. Its bark rippled like skin, and deep in the grooves of its trunk, I could see something that looked horribly like eyes. Ancient eyes. Alien eyes. Eyes that had watched the world change for millennia and decided that humanity was a cancer that needed cutting out. The grandmother tree was the heart of it all, the central intelligence controlling every root, every branch, every leaf in this section of forest. And it had been feeding on anyone unlucky enough to wander into its domain. How many hikers had disappeared over the years? How many missing persons reports had been filed and forgotten when no trace could be found? How many times had search teams walked right past victims trapped in wooden cages, hidden in the fog and shadow of the deep woods? More roots shot toward me. I rolled between them, sprinted toward the base of the grandmother tree. If I could reach the trunk, maybe I could hurt it enough to... Pain exploded through my leg as a root the size of a python wrapped around my thigh and squeezed. I felt my femur crack under the pressure, saw stars as agony lanced through my nervous system. My knife tumbled from nerveless fingers. This was it. Game over. I was going to die in this clearing, food for an ancient hunger that had outlived empires and ice ages. My rational mind, my scientific training, my 15 years of explaining away every supernatural story, none of it mattered now. But as the root lifted me toward the gaping maw that had opened in the grandmother tree's trunk, I thought about Marcus Rodriguez's voice on the phone. The absolute certainty that his sister was still alive. The bond between twins that couldn't be broken by time or distance or rational explanation. Some things couldn't be quantified or categorized or explained away. Some things just were. "Jennifer!" I screamed, putting every ounce of desperate love and determination I'd ever felt for my own daughter into her name. "Fight back. You're stronger than this thing." Something changed in the air. A shift in the forest's attention, like a massive predator suddenly realizing it had missed something important. The root holding me loosened slightly. Jennifer's eyes blazed with fury that had been building for 2 days of imprisonment. She grabbed the branches gagging her and yanked with strength born of pure rage. Wood cracked and splintered as she tore herself free. "You want to feed?" she snarled at the grandmother tree. "Feed on this." She pulled something from her jacket pocket, a small silver cylinder I recognized as a photographer's emergency flare, the kind used to signal for help in remote locations. She triggered it, and brilliant red light exploded through the clearing. The grandmother tree shrieked. Actually shrieked, a sound like 1,000 violins breaking at once. Ancient bark began to smoke and char where the magnesium light touched it. The roots holding me went slack, dropping me to the forest floor. "It hates light!" Jennifer shouted, even as her wooden cage began to splinter and crack. "Fire! Bright light! It can't stand!" I was already moving, pulling the emergency flare gun from my belt. I aimed at the base of the grandmother tree and fired. The flare struck bark and exploded in a shower of burning phosphorus that ate into wood like acid. The entire forest screamed. Every tree for miles around voiced its agony in a symphony of supernatural shrieking that shattered my eardrums and sent flocks of birds exploding into the sky. The ground bucked and heaved as root systems thrashed in pain. Branches whipped wildly overhead, raining down debris and broken limbs. The grandmother tree's trunk split open like a massive wound, revealing an interior that pulsed with bioluminescent veins. Something that might have been sap, or might have been blood poured from the gash, pooling on the forest floor in steaming puddles. Jennifer burst free of her wooden prison as the branches holding her withered and died. She ran to me, helped me to my feet, and together we stumbled away from the dying giant that had held this forest in supernatural thrall for centuries. Behind us, the grandmother tree's death throes continued. Ancient wood cracked and groaned as the massive trunk collapsed in on itself. The psychic scream that had emanated from its alien consciousness faded to a whisper, then to nothing. By the time we reached the main trail, the fog was beginning to lift. My radio crackled back to life, my GPS found satellite signal, and the normal sounds of a healthy forest, birds singing, small animals moving through underbrush, gradually returned. "Base, this is Unit 7, I gasped into my radio. "I have the missing person, requesting immediate medical evac at trail marker 4.2. We're both ambulatory but need transport." "Copy that, Unit 7. Medical team en route. Good work out there." Jennifer looked at me with eyes that held depths I'd never seen in another human being. Nobody's going to believe this, are they? I thought about my 15 years of explaining away supernatural encounters. About all the times I'd dismissed stories of moving trees and ancient forest spirits as hallucinations or hoaxes or mental illness. "No," I said finally. "They won't. But we'll know." She nodded, then pulled something from her jacket pocket. Her memory card, the one that had been missing from her camera. "I got pictures," she said quietly, before it took me. Pictures of the grandmother tree doing things trees aren't supposed to do. I stared at the small piece of technology that might hold the only evidence of what we'd just survived. "What do you want to do with them?" "I don't know yet. Maybe some things are meant to stay hidden. Maybe some stories are too dangerous to tell." We walked in silence toward the sound of approaching rescue vehicles. Behind us, deep in the grove of titans, something vast and ancient had finally died. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't been the only one of its kind. The redwood forest stretched for hundreds of miles along the northern California coast. Thousands of ancient trees, some over 2,000 years old, all connected by underground root systems that shared nutrients and information across vast distances. How many of them had developed the same alien intelligence? How many were still out there, watching and waiting and feeding on anyone foolish enough to venture too deep into their domain? I pulled out my phone and dialed Marcus Rodriguez's number. When he answered, his voice was thick with tears of relief. "She's alive," I said simply. "Your sister is alive." "I knew it," he whispered. "I could feel it. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for believing." As the medical team loaded Jennifer into the ambulance, she pressed something into my hand. A small piece of bark from the grandmother tree, still warm with residual life. "A reminder," she said. "For the next time someone tells you that trees can't think." Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Jennifer in those 2 days. I read every single one. My name is James Rodriguez, and the desperate sob in Dr. Chen's voice at 11:15 p.m. still echoes in my head 3 days later. "Please, Ranger Rodriguez, you have to find my daughter. Jessica never goes this long without calling. Something's wrong." I'd been settling into my worn leather recliner, nursing a cup of black coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, when my iPhone 6 buzzed against the oak table. The screen showed an unknown number, but in my line of work, unknown numbers at night usually meant emergency. "This is James Rodriguez, Sequoia National Forest Service." "Ranger Rodriguez? Thank God. My name is Dr. David Chen. My daughter Jessica, she's missing in your forest. She was researching local legends for her journalism degree, something about phantom radio transmissions. She was supposed to check in every 4 hours, but it's been..." His voice cracked. "It's been 8 hours since her last call." I set down my coffee cup, the ceramic clicking against the table in the silence of my cabin. 8 hours wasn't officially long enough to declare someone missing, but my gut, The same gut that had kept me alive during the incident 3 years ago was already churning. Tell me about her last known location, Dr. Chen. Fire Tower Road, around mile marker 7.8. She was investigating the old radio tower up there. Said she'd heard stories about impossible transmissions, voices calling for help from a station that's been dead since 1975. My blood turned to ice water. The old K4 tower. I'd hoped that place would stay forgotten, buried with the memory of my partner Danny Martinez, and the way his voice had called to me through the static before he vanished. Dr. Chen, I need you to understand something. That area, it's dangerous. Not just wilderness dangerous. There have been incidents. Incidents? What kind of incidents? The Park Service website doesn't mention any hazards beyond standard wilderness precautions. Because we don't put haunted radio frequencies that steal people's souls on the official hazard list, I thought grimly. I'll head out first light. In the meantime, have you tried calling her cell? Straight to voicemail, but she texted me this at 8:30. I heard the sound of him scrolling through his phone. She said, "Dad, you won't believe what I'm hearing. It's like the voices are calling my name." That was her last message. The familiar weight of dread settled in my chest like a stone. Jessica Chen had no idea what she'd stumbled into. The phantom frequency didn't just broadcast impossible transmissions. It called to specific people. It had called to Danny, and now it was calling to her. Dr. Chen, I'm heading out tonight. I know that area better than anyone. Better than anyone alive, anyway. I ended the call and stared at my reflection in the black window. 41 years old, graying temples and eyes that had seen too much. The scar running along my left temple from 3 years ago still ached when storms rolled in. Danny had been reaching for me when the frequency took him, his fingernails scratching trenches in my face as some invisible force pulled him backward into the static. I grabbed my gear from the closet. Maglite tactical flashlight, Garmin GPS unit, emergency beacon, first aid kit, rope, and my grandfather's compass, the only navigation tool that worked reliably near the tower. Modern electronics went haywire in that place. Most importantly, I grabbed the old analog radio Danny and I had modified with a frequency filter. If Jessica was still alive, if the entity was just toying with her like it had with others, this radio might be the only way to reach her before it decided to add her to its collection. The drive to Fire Tower Road took 45 minutes on winding mountain highways. My headlights carved through darkness thick as black wool, illuminating towering sequoias that had stood sentinel for centuries, ancient trees that had witnessed things humans weren't meant to see. At mile marker 7-8, I found Jessica's Honda Civic parked on the shoulder, hazard lights still blinking. The driver's door was open, keys dangling from the ignition. Her digital camera sat on the passenger seat, its memory card slot empty. I keyed my radio. Dispatch, this is Rodriguez. Found the missing person's vehicle at Fire Tower Road, mile 7.8. Requesting backup and search coordinator. Copy, Rodriguez. Backup ETA 60 minutes. Weather service reports incoming fog bank. Visibility dropping to near zero within the hour. Perfect. Fog always made the transmission stronger. I shouldered my pack and followed the beam of my maglite up the overgrown trail toward the tower. Jessica's footprints were clear in the damp earth. Size 7 hiking boots walking steadily uphill. No signs of struggle. They never struggled when the frequency had them. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in James's situation? Comment below. The trail wound through increasingly dense forest. Somewhere in the darkness an owl hooted, but the sound cut off mid-note, as if something had suddenly silenced it. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in as many steps. Half a mile up, I found Jessica's first piece of equipment, a professional audio recorder still running. The LED display showed it had been recording for 6 hours and 37 minutes. I rewound the file and pressed play. Static filled the air, punctuated by Jessica's voice. This is incredible. The locals were right. There's definitely some kind of transmission originating from this location. The frequency appears to be 101.9 FM, but that's impossible. K4 went off the air in 1975 after her voice faded, replaced by another voice bleeding through the static. A man's voice, distant and distorted. Help me, please. Can anyone hear me? I'm trapped in the tower. I'm basement level. Please. My hands shook as I recognized the voice. Danny Martinez, my partner, calling for help from a place that had no basement. Jessica's voice returned, excited. My God, that's a human voice. Someone's in distress. I heard her footsteps accelerating on the recording as she hurried toward the tower. Then came another voice through the static, a woman's voice this time clear as crystal. Jessica Chen. We've been waiting for you, Rock. Come to us. We have such stories to tell. The recording went dead. I clipped the device to my belt and continued climbing. The fog was rolling in fast now, wisps of gray threading between the trees like grasping fingers. In the distance, I could see the skeletal outline of the radio tower, its red warning lights dark for decades. At the base of the tower, I found Jessica's camera equipment scattered in a rough circle. Tripod legs bent at impossible angles, camera lens cracked in a spiderweb pattern, but no signs of violence, just the eerie precision of something that had carefully removed each item from her possession. The tower itself loomed 90 feet above me, its latticed steel frame disappearing into the fog. At its base sat the concrete foundation building that had once housed KF4's transmission equipment. The heavy steel door stood open, revealing only impenetrable darkness within. I keyed my modified radio and slowly turned the dial to 101.9 FM. Immediately, voices filled the air. Dozens of them, overlapping and echoing. James Rodriguez, you came back to us. We told you not to return, James. Danny's been asking for you. The girl is with us now. She's learning such interesting things. Come inside, James. Complete the set. I forced myself to speak into the radio's microphone. This is Ranger James Rodriguez. I'm here for Jessica Chen. Let her go. Laughter rippled through the static, the sound of dead leaves skittering across pavement. Oh, James. Still playing the hero? She came willingly. They always do when they hear the voices of their loved ones. Show her to me. Prove she's alive. Step inside the broadcast station, James. See for yourself. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, call for backup, wait for the cavalry. But Jessica Chen had parents who loved her. Maybe siblings. Maybe a boyfriend wondering why she hadn't come home. I couldn't let another family experience what Danny's had gone through. I stepped through the doorway. The interior of the building was wrong. Impossibly wrong. Where there should have been a single room filled with defunct radio equipment, I found myself in a vast space that stretched far beyond the building's external dimensions. The walls curved away into shadows, lined with broadcasting equipment from different eras. Tube amplifiers from the 1940s, solid-state boards from the 1980s, digital mixing consoles that wouldn't be invented for years. And standing at each piece of equipment, translucent figures worked the controls, broadcasters from across the decades, their eyes hollow and glowing with static. They turned to look at me as I entered, their mouths moving in perfect synchronization. Welcome back, James. We've saved a spot for you. In the center of the impossible room sat a chair surrounded by microphones. Jessica Chen was seated there, very much alive but completely motionless. Her eyes stared straight ahead, unblinking, while her mouth moved constantly, speaking into the microphones in a voice that wasn't her own. This is K4 broadcasting from beyond the veil. If you can hear this transmission, you are one of the chosen. Follow the sound of our voices. Join our eternal broadcast. We have such stories to tell, such truths to share about the spaces between frequency. I approached slowly, noting the way the phantom broadcasters tracked my movement. Jessica, can you hear me? Her head turned toward me with mechanical precision. When she spoke, it was her own voice, but distant and echoing as if coming from far away. Ranger Rodriguez, how did you find this place? It's amazing here. They're teaching me about the frequencies that exist between the normal radio spectrum. The voices of everyone who ever spoke into a microphone, all existing simultaneously in the electromagnetic field. Jessica, your father is worried sick. We need to get you out of here. But I'm learning so much. Did you know that consciousness can be transmitted just like radio waves? That personalities can be preserved in the space between frequencies? Her eyes began to glow with the same static light as the phantom broadcasters. They're going to make me part of the permanent staff. I'll never have to worry about deadlines or student loans again. I pulled out my grandfather's compass, watching the needle spin wildly in the presence of whatever electromagnetic phenomenon powered this place. Jessica, look at me. Really look at me. Do you remember driving here? Do you remember your father calling you? For a moment, confusion flickered across her face. Yes, I think so. But that feels like a long time ago. Like something that happened to someone else. The phantom broadcaster's voices rose in unison. She belongs to us now, James Rodriguez. Just as your partner Daniel Martinez belongs to us. Just as you will belong to us. A new figure materialized from the shadows. Danny Martinez, or what had been Danny Martinez, approached with the same translucent, static-filled appearance as the others, but his eyes still held a spark of recognition. James, buddy, don't fight it. Danny's voice came through clearly despite his spectral state. It's not so bad here. We get to broadcast the truth about reality, about the spaces between life and death, and we're together forever. All of us. Danny. My voice broke. I've missed you, partner, but this isn't living. This is just existing. What's the difference, James? Out there, we live and die and are forgotten. Here, we become part of something eternal. Our voices reach across dimensions, across time itself. I looked at Jessica, still seated in the chair, her awareness flickering between her true self and whatever the frequency was turning her into. I thought about her father's desperate voice on the phone. I thought about my own family, my sister Maria, who still called every Sunday, my nephew who looked up to his ranger uncle. The difference, I said, reaching for the emergency beacon on my belt, is choice. I activated the beacon's emergency transmission, flooding the local radio spectrum with a high-powered distress signal. The phantom broadcasters shrieked as the interference tore through their eternal transmission. The impossible architecture of the room began to flicker and waver. Jessica now, while they're distracted. She blinked rapidly, the static glow fading from her eyes. What? Where am I? This isn't possible. This room is bigger than... Don't think about it, just run! We sprinted toward the doorway as the phantom broadcasters howled in rage behind us. The room was collapsing back into its normal dimensions, the impossible space folding in on itself. Danny's voice called after us, fading into static. James, don't leave me here again. We burst through the doorway and into the fog-shrouded forest. I grabbed Jessica's hand and pulled her down the trail, not stopping until we reached her Honda Civic. Only then did I look back. The radio tower stood silent and dark against the fog, but from somewhere in its skeletal frame came the faint sound of broadcasting. Voices calling across impossible distances, trying to lure new souls into their eternal transmission. Jessica collapsed against her car, shaking. What was that place? Those people, they were dead, weren't they? Some things shouldn't be broadcast, I said, helping her into the passenger seat. Some frequencies should stay silent. As I drove her down the mountain toward safety, toward her father's desperate embrace and the warm lights of the ranger station, Jessica stared out the window at the tower disappearing into the fog. Ranger Rodriguez? In there. I think I understood something. About consciousness and radio waves and the spaces between frequencies. Should I write about this? Tell people what's up there. I thought about all the curious journalists and paranormal investigators who might read such a story. I thought about how many more voices the phantom frequency would add to its eternal broadcast. Some stories, I said, are better left untold. But even as I said it, I knew Jessica would never be able to forget. None of us ever could. The frequency had touched her, left its mark, and sometimes late at night when the atmospheric conditions were just right, she'd hear the voices calling. They'd be waiting for her to come back. They always were. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Jessica in that impossible room. I read every single one. My name is David, and I should have trusted the old Cherokee warnings about the breathing fog that hunts in autumn. But when you're a father of 2 daughters, and you've spent 8 years protecting visitors in these ancient Smoky Mountains, you start believing your ranger training matters more than ancestral wisdom. You start thinking your radio, your GPS, and your years of experience can save anyone from anything. You're wrong. The morning of October 13th, 2015, started like every other patrol day. My iPhone 6 buzzing at 5:30 a.m., Catherine mumbling "be safe" into her pillow, and me kissing my sleeping daughter's foreheads before stepping into the pre-dawn chill. Emma, my youngest at 7, had drawn me a picture the night before. A stick figure ranger with a big smile saving a stick figure hiker. "That's you, Daddy," she'd whispered, "always saving people." I'd tucked that drawing into my chest pocket, right next to my heart like I did every morning. The paper crinkled against my uniform shirt as I adjusted my radio harness and checked my Garmin eTrex GPS unit, standard 2015 Ranger tech that felt cutting edge back then. The Great Smoky Mountains in October are God's own cathedral, with maples bleeding crimson and oaks dressed in funeral gold. But there's something else in these mountains during autumn, something the Cherokee called Nvhiatsila, the breathing mist that devours. Park Service doesn't put that in the safety briefings. My boots, worn Danner Acadius with treads that knew every root and rock on the Appalachian Trail section, crunched through leaves as I started my morning patrol of Cataract Falls Trail. The air tasted of wood smoke and dying leaves, that bittersweet flavor of a mountain autumn that makes your chest tight with something between beauty and loss. At 7:42 a.m., my radio crackled with dispatch Sarah's voice. "Unit 47, we've got a solo hiker, female, approximately 19, reported overdue from yesterday's day hike on your section. Vehicle still in Cataract Falls parking lot. Families driving up from Knoxville." My stomach clenched the way it always did when someone's kid was missing. "Copy that, dispatch, beginning sign cutting at the trailhead." Sign cutting, that's what we call looking for tracks, disturbed vegetation, anything that shows where a person went. It's methodical work that keeps your mind busy while your heart pounds. I'd found the girl's tracks within 20 minutes, size 7 hiking boots, Merrill Moabs from the tread pattern, heading up the main trail like she was supposed to. Sarah Martinez, according to her vehicle registration. 19 years old, University of Tennessee sophomore, studying environmental science. Her car still had a parking permit and a water bottle on the dashboard. Condensation fogged on the inside of the windows like the mountain was already trying to claim her belongings. The tracks showed confidence at first. Good spacing, steady pace. But about 2 miles up, they started to wander. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in David's situation? Comment below. That's when I saw her. Sarah Martinez stood 30 feet ahead of me on the trail, facing away, perfectly still in jeans and a red University of Tennessee hoodie. Alive. Unharmed. Relief flooded through me like warm coffee, and I keyed my radio. "Unit 47 to dispatch. I've got visual on our missing hiker. She appears uninjured and..." But something was wrong. She wasn't moving, not even breathing. The forest around her had gone dead silent. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter, nothing. Even the ever-present white noise of mountain wind had stopped. "Sarah," I called out, my voice echoing strangely in the unnatural quiet. "Sarah Martinez? I'm David, with the Park Service. Your family's been worried sick about you." She turned around slowly, mechanically, and I saw her face. Her eyes were wide open but completely white, like cataracts had formed overnight. Her mouth hung slack, and when she tried to speak, only a soft rushing sound came out, like wind through a narrow canyon. Behind her, maybe 50 yards up the trail, a wall of fog was rolling down the mountain. But fog doesn't move that fast. Fog doesn't move in a straight line. And fog sure as hell doesn't make the temperature drop 20 degrees in 10 seconds. My breath started misting, and every instinct I'd developed in 8 years of mountain rescue screamed at me to run. But Sarah was standing right there, and she was somebody's daughter. Somebody's little girl who used to draw pictures of rangers saving people. My hand went to Emma's drawing in my pocket, and I took a step toward the girl. That's when Sarah opened her mouth wider than any human mouth should open, and the fog poured out of her throat. The mist hit me like a living thing, thick and warm and wrong. It smelled of copper pennies and rotting leaves, with an underlying sweetness like overripe fruit. But it wasn't just mist. I could feel consciousness in it, intelligence pressing against my mind like fingers probing for a way in. The fog wrapped around my legs first, and where it touched, my skin went numb. Dead numb, like Novocaine spreading up from my boots. I tried to key my radio, but my fingers wouldn't work right. The fog was climbing up my chest now, and I could feel it seeping through my uniform, through my skin, trying to get inside me. Sarah, or whatever was wearing Sarah's face, tilted her head at an impossible angle and smiled with too many teeth. "She's still in here," the thing whispered with Sarah's voice, but the words came from everywhere at once. Still conscious, still screaming. The fog reached my neck, and suddenly I couldn't move anything below my shoulders, but I could still think, still feel, still hear Sarah's real voice somewhere inside the mist, crying for her parents. That's when I understood what the Cherokee warnings really meant. The breathing mist didn't just kill, it collected. It kept its victims alive and aware, trapped in conscious paralysis while it used their bodies to hunt for more. My radio suddenly burst to life with static. Then Catherine's voice, impossible but clear. "David? David, where are you? The girls are asking for you." But Catherine didn't have a radio. Catherine was 40 miles away in Gatlinburg, probably making school lunches and wondering why I hadn't called to check in. The fog was in my head now, pulling memories, using them against me. Through the mist, I saw Emma and my older daughter Lucy standing on the trail ahead, wearing their pajamas, reaching out for me. "Daddy," Emma called. "Why won't you come home? Why won't you save us?" But my daughters were safe in their beds. This thing was showing me my worst fears, trying to make me give up, to accept the paralysis and join its collection. The fog had reached my throat when I managed to force my right hand into my chest pocket. Emma's drawing crinkled under my numb fingers, and I thought about the stick figure ranger saving the stick figure hiker. Not because he had better equipment or training, but because someone drew him with a big smile and believed he could do it. Sometimes love is stronger than ancient evil. Sometimes a father's promise matters more than Cherokee curses. I bit down on my tongue until I tasted blood, using the pain to focus, and screamed, "I am going home to my daughters." The words tore out of my throat like broken glass, and for just a second, the fog recoiled. Just long enough for me to grab Sarah's real hand, cold and lifeless but human, and run. We ran through fog thick as cotton with the conscious mist chasing us, flowing uphill like water in reverse. I could hear it behind us, a sound like breathing but amplified 1,000 times, angry now that its prey was escaping. Sarah's body was dead weight in my grip, her eyes still white, her feet barely touching the ground as I half carried, half dragged her down the mountain. My GPS was spinning wildly, showing impossible coordinates, and my radio was picking up voices of people who disappeared in these mountains over the past 50 years. But I kept running, following the trail by memory and desperation until we broke out of the fog bank and into clear mountain air. Sarah collapsed the moment we hit sunshine, gasping and retching, her eyes slowly returning to brown. I was awake the whole time," she whispered. "I could see through its eyes. It showed me everyone it's taken. They're all still alive in there, David. All of them." I called for life flight and sat with Sarah until the helicopter arrived, watching the fog retreat deeper into the mountains as the sun climbed higher. The official report said hypothermia and altitude sickness caused hallucinations. The Cherokee elders I talked to later just nodded and said the breathing mist was getting hungry as the old barriers weakened. I transferred to Mammoth Cave National Park the next month, told Catherine it was for better opportunities, but really I couldn't look at mountain fog the same way. Some nights when mist rolls across our yard in Kentucky, I still hear voices calling from inside it, and sometimes, on the worst nights, I hear Sarah screaming that she's still conscious in there, still aware, waiting for someone to believe the warnings and come save the rest of them. Emma still draws me pictures of rangers saving people. But now I know that sometimes the monsters collect heroes too. And sometimes being someone's father is the only magic strong enough to break ancient curses. The fog still moves wrong in the Smoky Mountains. The Cherokee still warn about NVHI at Sela. And Sarah Martinez still wakes up screaming, remembering what it feels like to be conscious inside something that should have killed her. Some warnings are written in blood. Others are written in the spaces between raindrops, but all of them are true. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Sarah. I read every single one. My name is Daniel Martinez, and I should have known that mirrors in nature are never just reflections. They're doorways to places where lost souls scream in eternal silence. And on October 15, 2015, I opened one of those doors wide enough for hell itself to reach through. The morning started like any other at Yellowstone's North Entrance Station, with the sharp bite of Wyoming autumn cutting through my standard issue jacket and the bitter taste of truck stop coffee coating my tongue. At 26, I was still the rookie. 3 months on the job and desperate to prove I belonged among the weathered veterans who spoke in grunt syllables and measured competence in successful rescues. My iPhone 6 buzzed against my chest pocket with Jessica's morning text. Boa sorte no seu primeiro caso grande. Te amo. The heart emoji made me smile despite the gray pre-dawn darkness pressing against the windows. Chief Ranger Patterson dropped the manila folder on my desk with the weight of 3 months' worth of unanswered questions. Madison Clark case, he said, his voice carrying the gravelly exhaustion of a man who'd seen too many families destroyed by these mountains. 21 years old, University of Montana student, vanished September 12th during a solo photography expedition near Mirror Lake. We combed every inch for 2 weeks. Nothing. Case went cold until yesterday. I opened the folder with hands that trembled slightly from caffeine and nervous energy. Madison's student ID photo stared back at me. Bright green eyes, auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, the kind of determined smile that suggested she wasn't afraid of anything the wilderness could throw at her. Below the photo, a stack of witness statements, search grid maps marked in red ink, and a single Polaroid that made my blood run cold. "What am I looking at?" I asked, holding up the photograph. Patterson leaned against my desk, his weathered face serious. "Hiker found that yesterday, wedged between some rocks near the south shore of Mirror Lake. Look at the date stamp. October 14th, 2015. Yesterday." The photo showed an antique hand mirror, ornate silver frame tarnished black with age, lying half submerged in the crystal clear lake water. But that wasn't what made my skin crawl. It was the reflection. Instead of showing sky and trees, the mirror's surface displayed what looked like a young woman's face, mouth open in a silent scream, hands pressed against the glass from the inside. "Could be a hoax," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. "Could be." Patterson's gray eyes held mine. "Or it could be the break we've been waiting for. Your first solo investigation, Martinez. Don't fuck it up." An hour later, I was hiking the familiar trail toward Mirror Lake, my boots crushing pine needles that released their sharp, clean scent with each step. The October air carried the metallic tang of approaching winter, and my breath came in visible puffs that dissipated in the thin atmosphere. My Garmin GPS chirped softly as I marked waypoints, and the digital radio crackled with routine chatter from other rangers scattered across the park's 2.2 million acres. Jessica's engagement ring sat in my jacket pocket, a surprise I'd been planning to spring on her when I returned from my first successful case. 3 months of salary saved up for the modest solitaire that caught sunlight like a tiny star. I'd been rehearsing the proposal in my head for weeks, but now the weight of the ring felt more like a talisman against whatever strangeness waited at Mirror Lake. The trail climbed steadily through lodgepole pine forest, their arrow-straight trunks creating cathedral columns that filtered the pale morning light into geometric patterns on the forest floor. Normally, I loved this hike. The way the elevation made my lungs work harder, the gradual transition from dense forest to alpine meadow, the anticipation of Mirror Lake's perfect surface reflecting the surrounding peaks like nature's own photograph. But today felt different. Wrong. The usual forest sounds were muted, as if someone had wrapped the entire wilderness in cotton. No bird calls, no chattering squirrels, no wind through the pine boughs. Just the rhythm of my breathing and the crunch of my boots on the needle-carpeted trail. When I paused to check my GPS, the silence pressed against my eardrums until I could hear my own heartbeat. Mirror Lake appeared through the trees like a piece of fallen sky, its surface so perfectly still it might have been polished glass. The surrounding peaks, Electric Peak to the north, the Thunderer to the east, stood reflected in flawless detail, creating the optical illusion that I was looking down into another world instead of across water. This was why they called it Mirror Lake, and why Madison had come here with her camera. I approached the south shore where the antique mirror had been found, my eyes scanning the rocky shoreline for any sign of disturbance. The October water was so clear I could see smooth stones on the bottom 20 feet out, but no glint of silver metal. Whatever remained of the mirror had either sunk beyond sight or been swept away by currents. That's when I saw her. Madison Clark stood chest deep in the lake, her auburn hair floating around her shoulders like seaweed, her green eyes wide with terror. Water lapped gently at her collarbone, but she wasn't moving, wasn't swimming, wasn't even breathing that I could see. She was just standing there in impossible stillness, her mouth open in what might have been a scream if any sound emerged. "Madison!" I shouted, dropping my pack and reaching for the emergency rope. "Hold on, I'm coming." I splashed into the frigid water without hesitation, the shock of it driving the air from my lungs in explosive puffs. The lake bottom dropped away sharply, and within 3 steps I was swimming, my heavy ranger gear dragging me down as I fought toward the motionless figure. The water was so cold it felt like liquid nitrogen burning my skin, and my muscles cramped almost immediately. "Madison, can you hear me?" I gasped, closing the distance with powerful strokes despite the weight of my equipment. "I'm Ranger Martinez. You're going to be okay." But as I got closer, details that should have made sense began to fragment into impossible geometry. Madison wasn't treading water. She was standing perfectly still, in water that had to be 15 feet deep. Her clothes weren't floating or moving with the gentle current. Her hair drifted in slow motion as if suspended in something thicker than water. And her eyes weren't looking at me. They were looking through me, focused on something behind me, with an expression of such pure terror that my blood turned to ice water in my veins. I spun around in the water, following her gaze back toward shore. Another Madison stood on the rocky beach wearing the same clothes with the same auburn hair. But this one was waving frantically and shouting words I couldn't hear over the rushing in my ears. She pointed toward the water with desperate urgency, and I realized with horror that she was trying to warn me about the Madison I was swimming toward. But that was impossible. Impossible. I turned back to the Madison in the water, and she was gone. Just gone. As if she'd never been there at all. The lake surface showed only my own reflection and the inverted image of the sky above. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Daniel's situation? Comment below. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grip the rocky shoreline as I hauled myself out of the lake. Water streamed from my saturated clothes, and the autumn air turned the moisture to ice crystals on my skin. I gasped and shivered, scanning the shoreline for any sign of the Madison who had been waving from the beach. Nothing. No footprints in the sandy soil, no disturbed rocks, no evidence that anyone had been there at all. I fumbled for my radio with numb fingers, nearly dropping it as I tried to key the microphone. "Base, this is Ranger Martinez at Mirror Lake. I need immediate backup and... I stopped, unable to finish the sentence. What was I going to say? That I'd seen a missing girl standing impossibly in deep water and her doppelganger on shore simultaneously? Static crackled through the radio speaker, punctuated by fragments of garbled voice that might have been human or might have been atmospheric interference. "Can you repeat? Lost signal. Martinez. Do you copy?" I tried again, adjusting the frequency dial with fingers that felt like frozen sausages. Nothing but white noise and the occasional burst of what sounded like laughter. High-pitched, childlike laughter that definitely wasn't coming from any of the other rangers. My iPhone showed no signal bars. The GPS was spinning uselessly, unable to lock onto any satellites despite the clear sky above. It was as if Mirror Lake existed in some kind of dead zone where normal communications simply couldn't penetrate. I needed to think rationally. Hypothermia could cause hallucinations. I knew that from my wilderness first aid training. The shock of the cold water might have triggered some kind of stress response that made me see things that weren't there. But even as I tried to rationalize what I'd witnessed, my eyes kept returning to the lake surface, searching for any sign of movement beneath. That's when I noticed the pictures. My waterproof camera had been running automatically, taking time-lapse shots every 30 seconds as part of the evidence-gathering protocol. I scrolled through the images with growing dread, watching myself approach the lake, drop my pack, and wade into the water. But in every single frame, I was alone. No Madison in the water, no Madison on shore, just me, swimming desperately toward empty lake while shouting at nothing, except in the final image, the one taken when I was hauling myself back to shore. There was something in the water behind me. Not Madison, but a pale oval that might have been a face just beneath the surface, watching me with dark hollows where eyes should be. I nearly dropped the camera. The sun was setting faster than it should have been, painting the lake surface in shades of blood and copper. According to my watch, it was only 2:30 p.m., but the light had the quality of late evening, and long shadows stretched across the water like grasping fingers. Time itself seemed to be bending around Mirror Lake, compressing hours into minutes in ways that violated every natural law I understood. That's when I saw the mirror. It floated just beneath the surface, about 50 yards out, the ornate silver frame catching the strange light and throwing it back in fractal patterns that hurt to look at directly. As I watched, it began to drift slowly toward shore, carried by currents that shouldn't exist in the still water. I should have run. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to grab my gear and get as far from Mirror Lake as possible before full darkness fell, but I was a ranger, and Madison Clark was still missing, and that antique mirror might be the only clue to what had happened to her. I waded back into the freezing water. The mirror seemed to recede as I approached, maintaining the same distance no matter how hard I swam. The silver frame gleamed with its own light now, and I could see that the surface wasn't reflecting the sky or trees or my own face. It was showing someplace else entirely, a room with wallpaper that might have been red or might have been stained with something darker. Carnival music playing from somewhere far away, the kind of tinny mechanical melody that emerged from old music boxes. And Madison was there, pressed against the glass from the inside, her mouth moving in words I couldn't hear but could somehow understand. Don't look. Don't look in the mirror. It sees you when you see it. But I was already looking, already caught in the hypnotic pull of that impossible reflection. And I felt something vast and hungry turning its attention toward me like a spotlight made of malevolence. The carnival music grew louder, and I could smell sawdust and popcorn and something underneath it all that reeked of ancient decay. The thing in the mirror smiled with Madison's face, but the expression was all wrong. Too wide, too knowing, too filled with the kind of joy that came from watching things suffer. It wore Madison's features like a carnival mask, and behind the eye holes I caught glimpses of something that had never been human. Daniel, it said in Madison's voice, the words somehow traveling through water and glass and reality itself to reach my ears. Daniel, you look tired. Wouldn't you like to rest? Wouldn't you like to see Jessica again? And suddenly Jessica was there in the mirror beside Madison, wearing her favorite blue sundress, the one she'd worn on our first date. She smiled and waved, and her lips formed the words, "I've been waiting for you," with perfect clarity. My rational mind knew it was a trap, knew that whatever lived in that mirror fed on loneliness and desperation and the human need to be with the people we loved. But Jessica looked so real, so perfectly herself, and I'd been treading water for so long that my limbs felt like lead weights dragging me down toward the lake bottom. "Just reach out," the thing with Madison's face whispered. "Just touch the surface. We're all here waiting for you, Daniel. All the people you've lost, all the people you will lose. Time doesn't work the same way here. You can be with them forever. I stretched out my hand toward the mirror's surface, my fingertips nearly touching the glass that somehow floated on top of the water without sinking. Jessica smiled encouragingly from within the reflection, and I could almost feel the warmth of her skin, almost smell her strawberry shampoo. But then I remembered the engagement ring in my jacket pocket, the weight of it pulling me down even as it reminded me why I needed to survive this. The real Jessica was waiting for me back at our apartment, probably making dinner and wondering when I'd be home. The real Jessica didn't know I carried her future in my pocket, didn't know that 3 months of careful saving had gone into the modest solitaire that represented every dream we'd built together. I jerked my hand back just as my fingertips brushed the mirror's surface. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. The thing wearing Madison's face shrieked with rage, its features melting and reforming into something that belonged in medieval descriptions of hell. The mirror erupted from the water like a breaching whale, spinning through the air before crashing back into the lake with enough force to send waves washing over the shoreline. And then it was gone, sinking into the depths with a trail of silver bubbles that caught the last rays of the dying sun. I swam for shore with desperate, clumsy strokes, my waterlogged gear threatening to drag me under with every movement. By the time I reached the rocky beach, full darkness had fallen despite the fact that my watch still read 2:45 p.m. The forest around Mirror Lake had become a wall of absolute black, and the only light came from the pale stars reflected in the water. My radio crackled to life with Patterson's voice. "Martinez, do you copy? You missed your scheduled check-in. What's your status?" I started, then stopped, unsure how to explain what I'd experienced. "I'm at Mirror Lake. The mirror. I found the mirror, but it's gone now. No sign of Madison Clark." "Copy that. Any evidence of recent activity?" I looked out at the lake, its surface once again perfectly still and reflecting the night sky with flawless precision. "Negative. Whatever happened here, it happened a long time ago." "Roger. Pack it up and head back to base. We'll file the report in the morning." As I gathered my soaked equipment and started the long hike back to the trailhead, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched from the water behind me. Every few minutes I turned around, scanning the lake surface for any sign of movement, but saw only stars and darkness reflected in the natural mirror. It wasn't until I was halfway back to the parking area that I realized the truth. Madison Clark had never left Mirror Lake at all. She was still there, trapped in whatever dimension existed behind the surface of that antique mirror, along with God only knew how many other people who had been lured in by promises of reunion with their loved ones. The thing that had worn her face. I thought of it as the mirror clown, though it had never looked like any traditional circus performer, was still hunting, still luring people to the water's edge with reflections of everything they'd lost or feared to lose. And somewhere in the depths of Mirror Lake, the silver-framed doorway to that terrible carnival was waiting for the next person desperate enough or lonely enough to reach out and touch the glass. 3 months later, Jessica said yes to my proposal on the shore of a different lake, Jenny Lake, where the water was too cloudy to show clear reflections and the only mirrors were the ones hanging safely in our bathroom. I never told her about what I'd seen at Mirror Lake, never explained why I'd come home soaking wet and shaking with more than cold. But sometimes, when I'm shaving in the morning or she's doing her makeup, I catch glimpses of movement in the peripheral edges of those bathroom mirrors. Familiar faces that smile and wave from within the glass, trying to coax me closer with promises I know better than to believe. Madison Clark was officially declared dead in absentia 6 months after my investigation. Her family held a memorial service beside Mirror Lake, and they asked me to say a few words about the search efforts. I told them we'd done everything possible, that some wilderness mysteries could never be solved. I didn't tell them that I'd found their daughter, and that she was still screaming silently behind a silver-framed mirror at the bottom of the lake, waiting for someone else to join her in whatever endless carnival of horrors the mirror clown called home. Some doors, once opened, can never be completely closed again. And some reflections show us truths we're not strong enough to survive. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying Ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror. And comment your theory about what really happened to Madison. I read every single one. My name is David, and at 6:47 a.m. on October 15, 2018, my radio crackled with the call that would force me to confront the demons I'd spent 3 years trying to forget. I was nursing my second cup of coffee in the Mammoth Hot Springs Ranger Station, watching steam rise from my ceramic mug, the one Emma had painted for me last Father's Day with crooked letters spelling "World's Best Dad." The October morning air bit through the station's old windows, carrying the scent of pine needles and that particular crisp smell that meant winter was coming early to Yellowstone's northern range. My weathered Motorola XPR 7550 radio sat silent on the desk beside incident reports I'd been avoiding, its green LED pulsing steadily like a mechanical heartbeat. Then the static burst through. Base to Unit 47, we have a code yellow missing person, coordinates 44.9537 degree N, 110, 4979 W, civilian female 19 years old, last seen yesterday 1800 hours. Dispatch's voice carried that particular tension that meant someone's world was about to collapse. My coffee turned to acid in my stomach. I keyed the radio with hands that shouldn't have been shaking, not after 15 years of search and rescue. But the coordinates put the missing person near Sheep-Eater Cliff, less than 5 miles from where I'd encountered that thing 3 years ago. The thing that had worn my partner Jake's face while the real Jake was already dead, torn apart by something that shouldn't exist. Unit 47 responding, I managed, my voice steady despite the cold sweat already forming between my shoulder blades. What's the victim's name? Sarah Mitchell, University of Montana student, solo backpacking trip. Parents called this morning when she failed to check in via satellite messenger. Last GPS ping shows her campsite approximately 2 clicks northeast of your position. Sarah. The name hit me like ice water because 3 years ago, the doppelganger had spoken to me in my daughter Emma's voice, calling, "Daddy, help me," from the darkness between the trees while Emma was safe at home, 400 miles away in Billings. I forced myself to focus on procedure, grabbing my standard search pack. Garmin InReach satellite communicator, first aid kit, emergency shelter, 72-hour food supply, water purification tablets, rope, headlamp, spare batteries. My service weapon, a Glock 22, .40 caliber, felt heavier than usual on my hip as I clipped the retention strap. In my breast pocket, I touched the folded piece of construction paper Emma had given me that morning before school. A crayon drawing of our family standing in front of our house, all stick figures holding hands under a smiling yellow sun. The trail to Sheep-Eater Cliff wound through stands of lodgepole pine and Douglas fir, their branches heavy with frost that hadn't melted despite the climbing sun. My Danner Acadia boots crunched through patches of snow and wet leaves, each step sending small puffs of cold air visible in the 34-degree morning. The familiar weight of my pack, exactly 28 pounds, distributed across my shoulders and lower back, should have been comforting, but instead every shadow between the trees seemed to move with purpose. At 0745 hours, I reached Sarah's last known position, a small clearing beside Soda Butte Creek where the water ran clear and cold over granite stones worn smooth by millennia of current. Her campsite was textbook perfect, bare canister properly positioned 200 feet from tent, food stored according to regulations, camp stove and fuel safely separated. Her blue REI Quarter Dome 2 tent stood undisturbed, guy lines taut, rainfly properly secured. Everything normal except for one detail that made my blood freeze. There were 2 sets of footprints leading away from the campsite. One set matched the size and tread pattern of hiking boots, women's size 8, Merrill Moab 3s based on the distinctive sole pattern I'd memorized from 1,000 search operations. But the second set was identical. Exactly identical. Same size, same tread, same depth of impression in the soft earth beside the creek, same wear pattern on the left heel where the hiker favored their right side. I keyed my radio with a hand that was definitely shaking now. Base, Unit 47 at the campsite. Victim's gear is present and accounted for, but I'm seeing unusual sign. Requesting backup and crime scene team. Static filled the air for too long before dispatch responded. Unit 47, backup is en route. ETA, 90 minutes. Continue standard search pattern until support arrives. 90 minutes. In 90 minutes, the sun would be higher, the shadows shorter, and maybe whatever was out here would be gone. Or maybe it would have claimed another victim. I thought of my wife Jennifer sleeping peacefully when I'd kissed her goodbye at 05:30, her dark hair spread across the pillow and the promise I'd made. Just a routine patrol, honey. I'll be home for Emma's soccer game at 3. Following the dual tracks, I moved deeper into the forest where the trees grew thick enough to block most of the morning sun. The temperature dropped another 5 degrees in the shade, and my breath came in visible puffs that dissipated quickly in the still air. The tracks led northwest toward an area locals called the Whispering Woods, a dense stand of ancient pines where sound behaved strangely, voices carried farther than they should, and electronic equipment frequently malfunctioned. That's when I heard her voice. "Help me," came a woman's voice from somewhere ahead, young and frightened and so heartbreakingly desperate that every instinct screamed at me to run toward it. "Please, someone help me." But I'd heard that exact tone before 3 years ago, when something had mimicked Emma's voice to lure me into the darkness. The memory hit me like a physical blow, following that fake voice deeper into the forest, finding Jake's mutilated body, and then seeing it. Something that wore Jake's face but moved wrong, smiled wrong, spoke in Jake's voice while Jake's dead eyes stared at me from 30 feet away. "Sarah?" I called out, drawing my sidearm and flicking off the safety. "Sarah Mitchell? This is Ranger David Chen with the National Park Service. Can you tell me your location?" "I'm here," the voice responded, closer now, maybe 50 meters ahead through the trees. "I'm hurt. I can't move. Please hurry." Every protocol said to call for backup, establish a perimeter, approach with caution, but every human instinct said a terrified girl needed help, and hesitation could mean the difference between life and death. I'd lived with the guilt of Jake's death for 3 years, knowing that if I'd been faster, smarter, more careful, my partner might still be alive. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in David's situation? Comment below. I moved toward the voice, every sense hyper-alert, my finger resting on the Glock's trigger guard. Through the trees ahead, I caught a flash of red fabric, a hiking jacket that matched the description Sarah's parents had given dispatch. She was sitting with her back against a large pine, one leg extended at an unnatural angle, her blonde hair hanging loose around her face. "Sarah?" I approached slowly, weapon lowered but ready. "I'm Ranger Chen. Are you injured?" She looked up at me with blue eyes filled with tears and pain, and for a moment, relief flooded through me. She was alive, conscious, responsive. This was just a normal search and rescue, a hiker with a broken ankle who'd spent a cold night in the woods. Not everything had to be supernatural. Not every shadow hid a monster. "Thank God," she whispered, and her voice cracked with exhaustion. "I fell yesterday evening. I think my ankle's broken. I've been calling for help all night." I keyed my radio. "Base Unit 47. Located the missing person, appears to have lower leg injury, requesting medical evacuation." But instead of dispatch's voice, I got only static. I checked the radio's display. Full battery, strong signal indicator, but no response from base. "The radios don't work well out here," Sarah said, and something in her tone made me look at her more carefully. "Too many trees, too much interference." That's when I noticed her hiking boots, Merrill Moab 3s, women's size 8, with a distinctive wear pattern on the left heel. The same boots that had left 2 sets of identical tracks at her campsite. "Sarah," I said slowly, "where are your backup boots?" She tilted her head slightly, and for just a moment her expression was completely blank. Not confused, not in pain, just empty, like someone had forgotten to program an appropriate response. "I don't understand," she said finally. "You left 2 sets of footprints at your campsite, identical prints, same boots, same wear pattern." I kept my hand near my weapon, every instinct screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. "How is that possible?" Sarah stared at me for a long moment, and then she smiled. It was a perfectly normal smile, the kind a rescued hiker might give their rescuer, but it lasted exactly 3 seconds too long. "Maybe you made a mistake," she said. "Maybe you saw what you expected to see." The forest around us had gone completely silent. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter, no insect noise, Just the kind of absolute quiet that meant every living thing had fled from a predator. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees in the space of a heartbeat, and frost began forming on the pine needles above us despite the climbing sun. "Sarah," I said, "what's your mother's maiden name?" "Johnson," she replied immediately. "What's your major at University of Montana?" "Environmental science." "What's your favorite color?" "Blue." All correct answers according to the information dispatch had provided. But her voice was wrong, too steady, too calm for someone who'd spent 12 hours alone in the wilderness with a broken ankle. No trace of hypothermia, no slurred speech from pain or shock, no 1,000-yard stare that came with genuine trauma. "Show me your ankle," I said. She pulled up her hiking pants, revealing a leg that was definitely swollen and discolored. A textbook example of a severe ankle fracture. But the injury was too perfect, too precisely placed, like someone had studied medical textbooks to create exactly the right visual cues. "You need to help me," she said, and now there was something different in her voice. An undertone I couldn't identify, like an echo of an echo. "I can't walk, you have to carry me." Every fiber of my being wanted to help her. She was young, injured, frightened. Everything about the situation screamed that she needed rescue. But 3 years ago, I'd followed my instincts and Jake had died for it. "I'm going to try the radio again," I said, stepping back to what I hoped was a safe distance. "Base, this is Unit 47. Emergency medical evacuation needed at coordinates." I rattled off our position while watching Sarah carefully. She wasn't moving, wasn't trying to adjust her position for comfort, wasn't doing any of the small unconscious things that injured people do. The radio crackled and dispatch's voice came through clearly. "Unit 47, we show your position as Sarah Mitchell's original campsite. You haven't moved in the past 30 minutes. Ice water ran through my veins. According to my GPS, we were 0.7 miles northwest of the campsite. According to dispatch, I was still standing beside Soda Butte Creek. "Base, that's incorrect. I'm northwest of the campsite, approximately." "Unit 47, GPS shows you stationary at the creek. Are you experiencing equipment malfunction?" I looked at my Garmin InReach. The coordinates on the screen matched my radio's GPS, both showing our position as Sarah's campsite. But I'd walked nearly a mile through increasingly dense forest. I'd followed 2 sets of tracks. I'd climbed 300 feet in elevation. "Sarah," I said quietly, "we need to go back to your campsite." "I can't walk," she repeated, and now her voice had that echo quality again, like it was coming from somewhere else and being projected through her mouth. "You have to carry me." I thought of Jennifer, probably just waking up, stretching in our warm bed while sunlight streamed through the windows of our house in Billings. I thought of Emma, getting ready for school, maybe wearing the purple sweater with the cat on it that she'd been obsessed with lately. I thought of my promise to be home for her soccer game and the drawing in my pocket of our stick figure family holding hands. "I'm going to check something," I said, and before Sarah could respond, I turned and started walking back the way we'd come, following our trail through the forest. The footprints were still there in the soft earth, my Danner Acadia boots leading in, and beside them, nothing. No tracks leading out from the campsite, no sign that anyone had ever walked this direction. I turned around. Sarah was gone. Not moved. Not hidden. Gone. The tree where she'd been sitting showed no sign of disturbance. No depression in the earth where her body had rested. No broken twigs where she might have pulled herself upright. No drag marks or blood trail or any indication that an injured person had ever been there. But her voice drifted from the trees around me, seeming to come from every direction at once. "David, why did you leave me?" And now it wasn't just Sarah's voice. It was Emma's voice too. My 6-year-old daughter calling for her daddy from 400 miles away. And Jennifer's voice. My wife asking why I'd abandoned them. Why I'd chosen work over family again. "David, come find us," they called in unison. 3 voices becoming one. One voice becoming many. "We're lost. We need you. Why won't you help us?" I ran, crashing through underbrush, branches tearing at my uniform, my pack bouncing painfully against my spine. I ran toward where the campsite should be, but the forest had changed. Trees that should have been familiar landmarks were gone or moved. The creek that should have been on my left was nowhere to be heard. The sun, which had been climbing steadily toward noon, was somehow setting in the east. My radio crackled. Unit 47, this is base. We're showing multiple GPS anomalies from your position. Please confirm your status. Base, I don't know where I am. The words felt like admitting failure, but honesty might be the only thing that kept me alive. My GPS is malfunctioning. The terrain doesn't match my memory of the area. Unit 47, backup is en route. Can you reach high ground for visual confirmation of your position? I looked around frantically. Through the trees to my left, I could see what looked like a ridge line maybe 200 meters away. Steep climb, but manageable, and it would give me line of sight to major landmarks. Copy, base, moving to elevated position for visual. The climb was harder than it should have been. My legs felt heavy, unresponsive, like I was walking through thick mud instead of forest floor. My lungs burned despite the moderate exertion, and my vision started tunneling at the edges, symptoms of altitude sickness that made no sense at Yellowstone's elevation. At the ridgeline, I looked out over a view that was completely wrong. Below me stretched the Yellowstone River Valley, but the river was flowing backward. The water moved upstream, against gravity, carrying debris and foam in the wrong direction. Yellowstone Lake was visible in the distance, but it was frozen solid despite the October temperature that should have kept it liquid for weeks yet. And scattered throughout the valley like toys in a child's playroom were dozens of identical campsites. Blue REI tents surrounded by the same rocks, the same fire rings, the same bear canisters. Every campsite had two figures beside it. One sitting injured against a tree. One standing over them looking up at the ridge where I stood. All of them had Sarah's face. My radio exploded with static, and through the white noise came voices. Sarah's voice, Emma's voice, Jennifer's voice, Jake's voice from 3 years ago, all speaking at once. David, we're down here. All of us. Everyone you've ever failed to save. Everyone you've ever let down. Come down, David, join us, stop running from what you are. And I understood, with the horrible clarity that comes with true terror, what I was dealing with. Not a shapeshifter, not a simple predator wearing stolen faces. Something worse. Something that fed on guilt and failure and the space between what we are and what we pretend to be. A doppelganger that didn't just copy appearances, it copied regrets. The real Sarah was down there somewhere in one of those campsites in one of those impossible mirror dimensions. And the only way to save her was to stop running from the thing that had been hunting me for 3 years, wearing the faces of everyone I'd failed to protect. I pulled out my cell phone, a 2018 iPhone XR with exactly 47% battery remaining, and opened my photos. There was Emma's school picture from last month, gap-toothed grin and eyes full of trust. There was Jennifer at our anniversary dinner, radiant in candlelight. There was our family selfie from last weekend's hike, all of us muddy and happy and alive. Real. These were real. Whatever was down in that valley was just echoes, just borrowed guilt given form. I started walking down the ridge, toward the impossible campsites and the army of Sarahs waiting for me. My Glock felt solid and reassuring in my hand, though I doubted bullets would help against something that existed in the spaces between realities. But I had to try, because somewhere in that maze of false reflections was a terrified 19-year-old girl who'd trusted the Park Service to keep her safe. And I'd be damned if I'd let another person die because I was too afraid to face my own failures. The sun set in the east as I descended into the Valley of Mirrors, and my radio filled with static that almost sounded like laughter. Almost. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Sarah. I read every single one. The investigation into Ranger David Chen's disappearance lasted 6 months. His radio equipment was found at Sarah Mitchell's original campsite, along with his service weapon and a child's crayon drawing of a stick figure family. Sarah was discovered 3 days later, 47 miles away, with no memory of how she'd gotten there and injuries consistent with a severe ankle fracture that had somehow healed perfectly. David Chen was never found. But hikers in the Whispering Woods sometimes report seeing a ranger in the distance, always walking deeper into the forest, always following voices only he can hear. My name is James, and I saw Emily for the last time 3 meters ahead of me on the trail before she simply disappeared. I keep replaying those final seconds in my mind like a broken film reel. One moment, Emily Martinez was there, 22 years old, brown ponytail bouncing as she navigated the fallen Douglas fir blocking the cathedral trail, and the next moment she wasn't. Not like she'd wandered off or ducked behind a tree. She was just gone, vanished between one blink and the next, leaving only the autumn silence of Olympic National Park pressing against my eardrums like a living thing. That was 8 hours ago. 8 hours of searching, calling, and slowly losing my fucking mind in these Washington woods that suddenly feel more like a trap than the wilderness I thought I knew. My hands shake as I adjust the beam of my Streamlight ProTac flashlight, the LED cutting through Douglas fir branches that seem to reach for me with gnarled fingers. The temperature dropped to 43 degrees an hour ago. I checked my Garmin eTrex GPS religiously every 15 minutes, and Emily's wearing nothing but a fleece jacket and jeans. Hypothermia will set in within 12 hours of exposure, maybe less if she's injured, scared, or wet from the intermittent October drizzle that's been misting down since sunset. I'm a rookie, 6 months on the job with the National Park Service, and this is my first real missing person case. My first real test as a ranger, and I'm failing spectacularly. The weight of my duty belt, radio, first aid kit, bear spray, emergency beacon, feels heavier with each step through the undergrowth. My regulation boots squelch in the damp soil, leaving Vibram treads in the mud that I'll probably be following in circles come morning. If I make it to morning without completely losing my shit. Emily? I call again, my voice echoing off the towering Sitka spruce and western hemlock that form a cathedral ceiling 200 feet above. Emily Martinez, can you hear me? Nothing. Just the distant sound of the Elwha River and the whisper of wind through cedar boughs. But wait. There. A sound that makes my blood freeze. Help. Help me. It's Emily's voice. Weak, frightened, coming from somewhere deeper in the forest to my northwest. The same direction she'd been heading when she vanished. I break into a run, crashing through salmonberry bushes and Devil's Club, my Motorola XTS 5000 radio bouncing against my hip. Dead weight since the battery died right before Emily disappeared. Fucking perfect timing. My smartphone shows 1 bar of Verizon coverage, but cell towers are useless this deep in the Olympic Mountains. Emily, I'm coming. Keep calling. The voice comes again, closer this time. James, help me. I'm hurt. My heart hammers against my ribs as I follow the sound through a grove of old-growth cedar, their massive trunks like ancient pillars holding up the night sky. My breath comes in sharp puffs of vapor, and the metallic taste of adrenaline floods my mouth, but something's wrong. Something I can't quite put my finger on. Emily's voice sounds perfect. Too perfect. Even accounting for the acoustics of the forest, even with fear and cold affecting her vocal cords, she sounds exactly like she did 8 hours ago when she was laughing about my nervousness on her first solo backcountry hike. Where are you? I shout, sweeping my flashlight beam across the massive root systems and moss-covered logs. Keep talking so I can find you. I'm here. I'm scared, James. Please hurry. The voice is coming from a cluster of western red cedar about 50 yards ahead, where the trail splits toward Hurricane Ridge. I charge forward, my Streamlight ProTac cutting through the darkness like a sword. But when I reach the spot, there's nothing. No Emily. No signs of disturbance. Just virgin forest floor covered in a thick carpet of cedar needles and the hollow echo of my own breathing. Emily? I call, spinning in a circle, my light beam dancing wildly across tree trunks. Where are you? I heard you right here. Silence. Then, from behind me, maybe 30 yards back the way I came. James? I'm hurt. Please. I whip around, my pulse spiking. That's impossible. I just came from that direction. Emily couldn't have moved past me without me seeing her. Could she? If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in James's situation? Comment below. I stumble back through the undergrowth, my boots catching on hidden roots and fallen branches. My hands are shaking now, from cold, from fear, from the growing certainty that something is very fucking wrong here. Emily, talk to me. I'm a ranger. I'm here to help. Help me, James. I can't move. My leg. The voice is definitely coming from a small clearing ahead, where a massive Douglas fir fell decades ago and created a natural bridge across a seasonal creek. I've been here before during my training. There are no caves, no hiding spots, nowhere for someone to disappear. I reach the fallen log and sweep my flashlight across every inch of the area. Moss, ferns, a few scattered deer droppings. But no Emily. My radio crackles suddenly, a burst of static that makes me jump like I've been shot. The display shows it somehow got power again, green LED glowing in the darkness. Ranger Morrison, this is base. Do you copy? I grab the radio with trembling hands. Morrison, that's my supervising ranger, Tom Morrison, 20-year veteran who's been babysitting me since I started. Tom, Jesus Christ, where have you been? I've got a missing hiker, Emily Martinez, 22 years old, last seen on Cathedral Trail 8 hours ago. My radio's been dead, I couldn't call for backup. Slow down, rookie, what's your 20? I check my GPS, reading off the coordinates. I'm hearing her voice, Tom. She's calling for help, but every time I reach the location, she's not there. It's like she's moving around me in circles. Long pause, static. Tom? Are you there? James, help me. I'm bleeding. Emily's voice again, but this time it's coming from my radio. Clear as day, transmitted over the Park Service frequency. That's impossible. Emily doesn't have a radio. Tom? I whisper into the handset. Did you hear that? Hear what, rookie? Your transmission is breaking up. Say again. I stare at the radio in my hands, my mind reeling. Emily's voice came through the speaker. I heard it clearly, but Tom didn't hear anything. James, please, I'm so cold. There it is again, transmitted over the radio waves, but somehow Tom isn't hearing it. My hands start to shake violently. I'm 26 years old, graduated from Colorado State with a degree in wildlife biology. Passed all my ranger training with flying colors. I'm not the type to hallucinate. I don't do drugs, barely drink, never had any kind of mental health issues. But right now, standing in the Olympic National Forest at 11:47 p.m., according to my Casio G-Shock, I'm starting to question my own sanity. Tom, I need backup out here. Something's not right. Roger that, James. ETA 20 minutes. Keep your position and maintain radio contact. Copy. I clip the radio back to my belt and try to steady my breathing. 20 minutes. I can hold it together for 20 minutes. James, why aren't you helping me? Emily's voice drifts through the trees from my left toward the river. Plaintive, hurt, confused. I want to run toward it. Every instinct screams at me to chase that voice, to find Emily and prove I'm not a complete fuck-up as a ranger. But something deeper, some primitive survival instinct is telling me to stay put. The voice sounds too much like Emily. Every inflection, every vocal quirk, exactly as I remember from our brief conversation 8 hours ago when she checked in at the ranger station. When she smiled and asked if I'd been working here long, and I'd stammered like a fucking teenager because she was pretty, and I'm still not used to talking to park visitors without Morrison hovering over my shoulder. How could someone injured and hypothermic in the wilderness sound exactly the same as someone comfortable and warm in a heated building? James, I'm scared. Why won't you come find me? The voice is closer now, maybe 20 yards northeast, near a cluster of ancient Sitka spruce. And there's something else. A quality to the sound that makes my teeth ache, like fingernails on a chalkboard pitched just below conscious hearing. I unholster my bear spray with my free hand, standard protocol when dealing with unknown situations in the backcountry. But bear spray won't help if I'm losing my mind. My phone buzzes, a text message. Somehow I've got 2 bars of signal now. It's from my wife Sarah. How's the search going? Thinking of you. Emma keeps asking when Daddy's coming home. Emma, my 4-year-old daughter who thinks I'm the bravest person in the world because I work in the forest with the bears and the eagles. Who made me promise this morning that I'd read her goodnight moon when I got home from my shift. I tap out a quick reply. Still looking, should be home by morning. Kiss him for me. The message fails to send. Of course. James, I see your light. I'm here. Emily's voice again, and this time I see movement. A flash of something pale between the trees, maybe 40 yards away. A person-shaped shadow that's there for a split second and then gone. This is it. This is real. Emily's alive, and I'm going to find her and bring her home and prove that rookie rangers aren't just tourist information dispensers in expensive uniforms. I start toward the movement, my Streamlight Pro Tac cutting through the underbrush. My feet find the game trail that winds between the massive tree trunks, probably carved by Roosevelt elk decades ago. Keep calling, Emily, I'm coming. Here, I'm here. The voice leads me deeper into the old growth section, where the trees are so massive they could hide school buses behind their trunks. This is the part of Olympic National Park that makes people from back east lose their minds. Trees that were ancient when Columbus was still getting seasick in Spanish harbors. But it's also the part where people disappear. Not often, and usually because they're unprepared city folks who think a day hike is the same as a walk through Central Park. But every year a few don't come back. James, help. The voice is weaker now, more distant, leading me toward Hurricane Ridge, into the high country where the temperature drops another 10 degrees, and the wind cuts through even the best outdoor gear like it's tissue paper. I check my GPS. I'm already 2 miles from where Emily originally disappeared, following her voice through terrain that would be challenging for an experienced hiker in daylight, let alone someone injured in the dark. How did she cover this much ground if she's hurt? My radio crackles. James, this is Morrison. Status report. I'm tracking the victim's voice toward Hurricane Ridge. She keeps calling for help, but I can't get a visual. Copy that. We've got SAR teams mobilizing, but rookie, be careful. You're getting into some rough country up there. Understood. And James, how well do you know this Emily Martinez? The question stops me cold. What do you mean? I mean, what's her background? Who reported her missing? Because I've been checking our records and we don't have any backcountry permits issued today for that name. My blood turns to ice water. What? No permits, no check-ins, no emergency contacts. Far as our system shows, Emily Martinez doesn't exist. The radio falls from my numb fingers, clattering against a fallen log. In the sudden silence, I hear Emily's voice again, closer than ever. James, why did you let me disappear? But this time the voice is coming from directly behind me. I spin around, my flashlight beam sweeping wildly, and for one horrible moment I see her. Emily Martinez, exactly as she looked 8 hours ago. Brown ponytail, green fleece jacket, jeans, standing 10 feet away in a shaft of my LED light. But her eyes are wrong. They're black, completely black, like someone filled them with oil. And she's smiling. Found you, she says in a voice that sounds like Emily but feels like ice picks driven through my eardrums. I stumble backward, my boot catching on a root, and crash to the forest floor. My flashlight flies from my grip, the beam spinning crazy patterns across the cedar canopy before the lens shatters against a rock. Darkness swallows me whole. In the black silence of the Olympic forest, I hear my own voice calling out, "Help me, help me. I'm scared." But my mouth isn't moving. Something else is wearing my voice now. And somewhere in the distance I can hear Tom Morrison's radio crackling as he responds to what he thinks is my call for help. The thing that used to look like Emily starts laughing, and the sound echoes through the trees like a broken music box playing in an empty house. I try to scream, but no sound comes out. Something wet and warm drips onto my face from the branches above, and in the pale moonlight filtering through the clouds, I can see them, dozens of them, hanging from the trees like giant cocoons, human-shaped bundles wrapped in what looks like bark and moss, suspended 30 feet above the forest floor, and they're all moving. struggling weakly against their bindings. One of them has brown hair, a green fleece jacket. The real Emily Martinez has been here all along. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying Ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror. And comment your theory about what really happened to Emily. I read every single one. The end. This supernatural horror story was crafted specifically for your chosen elements. James the Rookie Ranger, Emily the Missing Victim, O Imitador de Voces, the Voice Imitator, Reality Horror Intensity, and the Witnessed Disappearance Scenario. The creature used Emily's voice to lead James into its trap, just as it had done to countless other victims hanging in the trees above.